Good evening, adventurers. Tonight's tale consists of our writer playing in a game with a dungeon master who seems to have more focus on the writer's characters than the others. They ask that they don't change their character as they are an integral part of the story. However, it would turn out that the dungeon master's plan is more sinister than you'd expect. Let's get into it. Tonight's tale is called The Backstabbing DM. To understand, you need to know a little bit about me as a player. My preferences more precisely. I come to the table for a cooperative game and go a long way to ensure this. Things don't need to be done by the power of friendship, but functioning colleagues is a must. If the game gets backstabby, secretive, or whatever players do to disrupt one another, I don't care for your reasoning. I leave the table. I don't intend to elaborate on this, but I always let my fellow players know. We played The Dark Eye back then, but for simplicity's sake I'll use D&D terms. It's not a perfect match, but it will work good enough for this story. A friend and one of the best dungeon masters I know had been planning a campaign about religion and religious groups. He studied something close to anthropology and knows a lot about this stuff. We were hyped and we created characters. Sadly, he had to cancel in favour of a work project last minute. This is when Barry jumped in and offered to dungeon master something similar. Up till then, he too had been a decent dungeon master, so we were happy for the replacement. Although we were conscious about our expectations. It's a different dungeon master with a different campaign after all. To ease us into the other campaigns, Barry told us to keep our characters. I took a closer look at the paladin style character I had made with quite precise notes about his convictions, which made sense for the other game and was already greenlit. For some regular campaigns this could all be useless at best and problematic at worst. So I went to Barry to talk about this. He went on to compliment me how well done this all was and how perfectly this all fit into his campaign. My character specifically was quite important to his plans, and my motivations could drive some of the plot. Also, characters are already created and roles are set, so I know already that this PC will be a good fit with the rest of the other PCs. Besides, he doesn't want to go through the whole session 0 again to coordinate roles in the group. Alright, I'm sold. Let's keep the paladin around. So we skipped session 0 and went straight into session 1. People introduced their characters, and no way. I was the only player with his original character. Now my goody two-shoes paladin was in a group with a black mage, a witch, and a cleric of an opposing deity. I asked Barry, what the hell? He urged me to give the group a chance and let this unfold. The players knew what they were doing and he made extra sure by guiding them through the creation process. Okay, I guess. I suggested making a new character anyway. I'm not that attached to my player character, and it would smooth things over just in case. But I was told no, a very firm no. Barry made clear that my character was too important and cannot be replaced. I was suspicious about this, but I had no tangible argument, so I went along. Do you remember what I told you about cooperation and secrecy? Now let me introduce you to Gary. Gary played a nobleman, seemingly. He was kind of the face of the group, managed the group's finances and traded with the merchants, all of these things. We went a couple of sessions without major hiccups, and thanks to some decent roleplay with a little help of some healthy metagaming, we were actually able to make these characters believable colleagues in dungeoneering. I was quite relieved. The only odd thing was equipment disappearing all the time. Only small items of medium value. It was annoying. We investigated, but came to no conclusion. Then we found a cursed book about demons. I loved that, because my character's order was about collecting knowledge, especially on my god's enemies. So I had to make a tough decision, end the curse and destroy the book, or accept being cursed and give the book to the order. I decided for the latter. We travelled back to town and the book was gone, just like that. I was still cursed, mind you. We skip ahead. An NPC priest from my order that was actually a friend of my PC died off screen. I buried him and took his holy symbol in remembrance. I thought it was cool. Suddenly the symbol vanishes too. I started yet another investigation of what happened, but to no avail. Skip further ahead. Our noble was in trouble. He used a rather unique ability. Barney, the player next to him, noticed that there's no such ability on his sheet. Barry hadn't checked the sheet and just told us it's fine and urged the group to move on, but Barney and I caught on. After the session I went to Barry and confronted him. It was obvious Gary is playing some rogue, has conned us and is probably the one stealing all the time. Now, I can bear some minor items missing if that makes Gary feel better about himself. But the book and the symbol? That's sabotaging another player, and I'm not having that. But this went nowhere. Barry just shrugged it off. He told me, in truth, Gary plays another cleric of yet another deity, and since his deity's domain is theft, greed and selfishness, Gary is actually playing his role well, so I need to deal with it. My argument about me hating this playstyle since forever went over his head, seemingly, but we'll get back to that later. However, I also talked to Gary. He tuned it down a bit. Problem solved. It turns out every character had decent social skills. Every single one. I was quite happy with that, but Barry was not. So he came to me and requested I tune my socialising in character down. That confused the hell out of me. We went back and forth for a while to reiterate. He said that there are too many PCs socialising at once, and he doesn't want to play so many social encounters. Sad, but okay. Also, there's a lot of combat ahead, and we focus on advancing the wrong skills. I should put all of my skills into combat from now on. I called BS on that. He reiterated that he has a role planned out for me, and I have the wrong skill set to fill that role. Now that's a whole new level of BS. This conversation went nowhere. A while later, Barry came to me again. Combat was about to get seriously difficult for us, and he wasn't willing to do half-assed combat encounters for us. I was confused as to why, but he requested me to trust him on this, and that it's necessary to up the difficulty. So, to survive his campaign, I needed to power up my character. I still found this highly suspicious. Also, I still didn't want to invest in combat only, so I suggested picking up some pretty OP feats that might do the trick as a compromise. Now, I'm aware those are considered power gaming, but it seemed like that's what he wanted. And it was a quick and easy way to power up without investing 100%. Barry agreed and let me buy the feats right the next session, with the teacher in place and all. We skip a few sessions ahead. A huge siege on the city we were living in, a huge army of orcs and some ogres sprinkled in for good measure. Now, Barry let the orcs build a nice queue for us to slay them one by one. It was easy as hell, and boring. Then Barry moved the challenge up to the ogres. Fair enough. The ogre came in, I tried my new combat powers on him, and the ogre went down in one hit. The overall combat wasn't satisfying, but one-shotting an ogre was at least funny. Barry got sour immediately. That's not how these feats work. I used them intentionally wrong. Now, I can take a rule discussion, but intentionally. But I believe I can defuse this easily without making a fuss. So I pull out the rulebook and we have a look during another player's turn. That's where he snaps, takes the book from my hands and shouts at me for wasting everybody's time at the table with looking up rules, because I won't find a rule in favour of my interpretation. I'd already found it by that point. And he claimed that I was undermining his authority. Alright, you got me on that one. Your authority stinks. The situation got heated. No point in arguing any further. I mentally checked out for the session and went along with his ruling. After the session I wanted to get back to this, but no. Barry was still fuming and further accused me of being ignorant towards the rules. Time to leave this table, you might think. Well, not yet. Right there I was convinced that he's only mad because his siege backfired and sucked. I was the only one who had a modicum of fun there, and it showed. I decided to leave it and wait for him to cool down. Well before the siege began, Barry asked me a peculiar question, but they only become important after. How far would I go with my PC if I needed to do something terrible against my PC's convictions? It's a difficult question, but I thought I had a good answer. I'd go pretty far to avoid going against my beliefs. That's what piety does. I get my vibe my PC's religion is standing in the way of something, and if it's not a good fit, I'll make a new character. But he denied it, saying it's actually the answer he wanted to hear. Barry clarified that my character is too important to leave for what he planned. I'm not allowed to switch characters. Also, it would be a waste if I didn't play the next part with this character, as there was some deep roleplay that I'll absolutely enjoy. Skip ahead into the siege. The orc army was pushed back. Reinforcements were on the way. We were clearly winning. Then we discovered a vampire lurking within the city. We were close to capturing him, but Barry threatened us out of game, saying he would TPK us if we tried. The group was pissed. It was obvious railroading. Out of the blue, I was requested to leave the room. Well, okay then. After I was invited back in, the whole group looked at me guiltily as hell. I asked what happened, and despite Barry's initial protest, Wilma, who played the witch, just straight up told me everything because she felt bad. The commander of our city decided to team up with a vampire to wipe out the almost retreating orcs. And of course, everyone expected me to reject the idea and go against the commander. They were encouraged by Barry out of game to follow and let the vampire convert the soldiers into an army of thralls. We're playing an evil party now. What the hell, this sucks. We need to talk. Of course, I suggested a new character, but I was still told no. Because my character is too important for what he has planned. Only then I get the idea that the plan is simply to torture me. Barry went on to tell everyone how unreasonable I am, that I'm an awful role player for neither wanting to play evil characters nor wanting to play in a hostile group dynamic, especially since my character would have blocked all plot progression by disallowing these, what he called, group decisions. Wilma, her boyfriend Fred, and myself packed our things and left. Fred remarked that none of this was any player's decision in the first place. Barry contacted me through, I think, Steam, only this time I was prepared. First, he asked me to clarify if I had left now for good, and a bunch of other things, nothing unreasonable. But then came some off comments about how I'm not a good player since I can't put my personal issues and preferences aside. This was just dumb. I decided not to answer but asked something else instead. I knew this guy as a dungeon master for a long time. He was better than this. He is smarter than this, and more importantly, this was all easily predictable. Now, remember, back in the day, Steam Messenger didn't save conversations, and he had abused that fact a couple of times in the past. He openly admitted that he had always resented me. He didn't want me in his social circle, but since everyone else seemed to like me and invite me all the time, he didn't want to be singled out, and he played along. He also admitted that he knew that I would hate this, and that this would be a good chance to bully me out, and now he's happy it worked. I screenshotted the whole thing and sent it to everyone without further comment. He got uninvited to Wilma and Fred's wedding, a couple of birthday parties, and more within a week. We don't speak about him anymore. And there we have it. I wasn't expecting the twist towards the end. I'm accustomed to Dungeon Masters being unpleasant and directing some vitriol towards a player, or even all of their players. But I can't say I've ever seen or had one who has admitted to a player that they actually resented them. Actively leading a tabletop game in order to attempt to ostracize and remove someone from a friend group is just nefarious and unforgivable. Luckily, the writer was able to prove it to their friends, and Barry the DM got his just desserts. If you have any similar stories, please let me know in the comments. I look forward to reading them. And if you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe. It really helps me out. Thank you. That's all I have for this evening. Good night.